What is the Magnificent Seven 24 method?
Okay, so originally I just called it the 24 plot point method, and I've been teaching it for years. And then I saw, hey, people have these methods like save the cat and all this kind of, I need something flashier, even though I'm not like selling it, promoting it, doing it online or like that. So let me start at the beginning. The 24 plot point system, which is the Magnificent 724, it's something I worked out by watching just tons of movies. And in watching these movies, we determined, okay, what do all these movies, and I'm talking about war movies, dramas, comedies, you name it, what do they all have in common? And we started to realize, well, they all move forward at a similar pace. And we started to recognize, and of course they all have 3-act structure, we know that. We know the basics. But I started to realize that almost every story advances at a very similar pace. And what is that pace? Well, I said, okay, I'm gonna make a note every time a story advances, something happens to advance the story forward. And it came out that on average, that happened 24 times in a screenplay. Some did more, some did less. But if we took 100 screenplays, it averaged out to 24. That was a really magic number because when I started to break it down by acts, it came out to 6 times in the first act, 12 times in the second act, 6 times in the third act. So what I'm saying is 24 times in a story, your story needs to advance forward. New information has to come on screen. We just found the map. We just rescued the girl. We just, we arrived on the continent. Whatever it is, it's moving the story forward. And I find that happens 6 times in the first act, 6 times in the first 30 minutes, and then it happens 12 more times in that very difficult second act, that 1-hour window, and then 6 times in the third act. Now, so I have these tests, I use these purity tests I use in my class, and I ask them, okay, tell me a scene. Does it move the story forward? If it moves the story forward, it's a plot point, write it down. If it doesn't move the story forward, write it down anyhow. Don't write down an idea, but it's not a plot point. One of the examples I use, it's easy to find plot points in movies, the first act break, and they're a million. But one of the examples I use of something that's not a plot point is the Royale with cheese scene in Pulp Fiction when Jules and Vincent are driving in the car and they're talking about going to Amsterdam and eating a hamburger. It's one of my favorite scenes in movies because it really shows the bond between these characters and it's wonderful dialogue, but it isn't moving the story forward. And probably as a teacher, I would say, why is this in here? It's not moving the story forward. I'd be wrong. You should definitely keep it in there. It's brilliant writing. But my point is, I use as an example to students, that's a great scene, doesn't move the story forward. We're looking for 24 instances in a 2-hour window where the story moves forward. Now, when you do a little bit of movie math, 24 plot points broken down by 120 minutes, right? A 2-hour movie comes out to 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes, I like my students' stories, I like my stories to move forward. New information. Now, people start to say, oh, well, that's a formula. I don't think it's a formula. I look at it more as a structure. I look at it as architecture, story architecture. I'm not telling you what to put in those plot points, but I'm telling you that every time the story moves forward, I want the story to move forward every 5 minutes or so. If it takes 7 minutes, we're fine. If it does it in 3, we're good. On average, we need to move forward every 5 minutes. And I say to my students, why do you think this is? And the answer is they demand new information. Audiences demand new information every 5 minutes. We just do. We watch TikToks. We watch Instagram. And I grew up on Sesame Street. What did Sesame Street deliver you? 5-minute lectures on the letter A or how to be a friend. We've grown up in 5-minute intervals. MTV gave us songs in 5-minute intervals. Music has always done that. So we're not alien. It's not an alien thing to sit there and say, 5 minutes, where'd you come on? We like new information every 5 minutes. So that's my plot points. 24 times the story moves forward every 5 minutes. And some of my students get really freaked out and say, well, here's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna plot point out your story. Well, I don't have my story. Okay, what are you writing? Oh, you're writing something very similar to like, The Martian. Let's go watch The Martian and let's plot point that movie out. So I start by having my students plot point movies that already exist before they get to plot pointing their own. So they understand how it works. And they go, holy cow, you're right, 24 plot points. 26 sometimes, 23 sometimes, but 24 plot points. The stories move forward at a normal pace. And I go, oh, there's more than that. I said, that first act break, is going to come at plot point 6, which is going to come at about 30 minutes. Now, this is not just my system, that's Hollywood in general. That first act break usually shows up at about 30 minutes. And I tell them, I said, I want you to start your watch when the movie starts, and I want you to look, and when that act break lands, and we talk about act breaks, it's going to be 30 minutes, and they come back to class and go, holy cow, you were right on the money. It was 30 minutes. So that's the plot point. That's the 24 plot points. There's a lot more to it than that, obviously. But then I added the 7, the magnificent 7, because I decided, well, you know, all plot points are not alike. They're not all just beats that move the story forward. There are 7 I felt are more important than the others. The first one is the inciting incident. Now, that happens in the first 5, 10 minutes of the film, usually the first 5 minutes of the film. So plot point 1, maybe 2, but plot 1 or 2, that's the first of the Magnificent 7. The second of the Magnificent 7 is the first act break, which I consider to be the most important plot point in the entire movie. Because this is the announcement. This is where the audience is told, this is what the movie's about. Here's the adventure, here's where we're gonna go. You know, if it's Star Wars, this is the announcement, we're gonna go rescue a princess. You know, prior to that, we're not sure what's going on. There's a lot of stuff going on, but the announcement is we're gonna go rescue a princess. The first act break, like I said, that's my second of the Magnificent 7, but it's the most important one. The third act break, I put it around plot point 9. It's just an act twist. Usually a good story, even a romance, even a drama, takes a little bit of a story twist somewhere early into the second act. And then I believe the fourth plot point is my midpoint. And the midpoint is plot point 12, middle of the story, 60 minutes in. And I generally define it, I mean, we go a lot deeper in class about this, but I generally define it as the end of one adventure and the beginning of another. And it almost always works that way, like in Star Wars again. And by the way, I use Star Wars for everything in my class. Required viewing, because the format of the story is so damn good. But in Star Wars, they rescue the princess at midpoint. They succeed their goal, right? Rescue the princess. Only it doesn't work out like they want it to. In Indiana Jones, he gets the Ark of the Covenant at the middle of the film, you know, completed one adventure, a new one begins. So now we're on to plot point, what was that, 4? I did 4. 5 is another act twist. Plot point 6 is, what do I call it? You know, my 7 is, like the 6th of my special 7, my Magnificent 7 is the second act break. Hero's at his lowest point. Again, this is nothing new. Everyone teaches second act breaks. And then the last plot point 7, is the finale. Now, I picked these out because when my students come to me, when people come to me and say, well, I can't plot point out 24 plot points. I can't think. I said, okay, what do you know? And they always know those 7, at least 5 of those 7. Well, I know what the act break is going to be. I know why he's going to go on the adventure, you know, to go rob Fort Knox. And I know he's going to get caught halfway through. All right, so you have a midpoint, you have a start. Then let's call that plot point 6 and plot point 12. What else you got? Well, I know in the end he's going to get away with it. All right, so you have you have that 7. You've got number 7 of my 7. You got 3 so far. And how about the inciting incident? Oh yeah, he's going to get broken out of jail in the first 5 pages. Oh, so you've got the first of the Magnificent 7. So as I talk to them, they realize I've got 7 beats already in my brain for a story that all I need to come up now with, what is it, 20, no, you do the math. I don't know how to do math, I'm a screenwriter. But the point is, everyone can get 7 knocked off really fast, and that gets them excited. Because one of the things I do when I teach screenwriting is I want to get you excited. You are not walking into a classroom where I'm going to sit there and say, screenwriting is an elite business, you have no business being here, you will fail, go away. You know, this is not The Paper Chase, if you remember that film. This is me saying, you can do this. Brilliant people have done this, and far from brilliant people have done this. So let's figure it out together. And I try to unintimidate them by saying, I'll bet you already know a third of your story. And so once they realize they know 7 of these 24, the rest start to flow. I mean, it takes a little time, and we work with them, or they work with them, but they get there, and they get so excited. I wish I had known this in school. I did not really come to this until we started writing after, you know. Well, okay. My writing partner, Jim, and I really kind of created this around the time we started writing our first screenplay. But we weren't taught it in school. We just kind of developed it because we said this is a much better way to do this.
Carpe diem.
Yeah, yes, yeah, good point, yeah.
When you're developing a movie idea, do you always start with the Magnificent Seven before you start writing anything else?
I don't so much start with the Magnificent Seven or the 24 plots. I start one step earlier. I start with the idea. Is this an interesting, fun idea? And some of them, it's just an idea. Again, I kind of mentioned some guys want to rob Fort Knox. That's interesting, but how do I make that more interesting? They are currently incarcerated. So now that's going to make it an interesting twist. And so my story, now I go, okay, they're incarcerated, but they're going to rob Fort Knox, and they want to do it while they're incarcerated. So now now the idea starts to bubble in my brain, and I go, okay, let's go to the Magnificent Seven. Can I get those plot points? Yes. A guy gets incarcerated and says, I know how to rob Fort Knox. That's going to be the inciting incident. I'm just making this up. I don't really have a story here. But my point is, I start to build the pieces and say, what do I need to do to get those 7 big beats into my story? They rob Fort Knox, and then they need to get back in prison before they get caught, so that they're never accused of robbing the Fort Knox. The gold is hidden. They're going to be paroled in 6 weeks anyway, but they have the perfect alibi. Okay, so the end of the movie, they have to get back into prison. So I start to beat out these story ideas, and they start coming to me fast at this point, too much. But that's when I start to look for the 7, and then I start to fill in the blanks. And believe me, when you have a high concept story, and that's the world I do like to live in, high concept, a good idea starts to write itself. And so when I tell you that, you start to visualize in your brain, oh, I totally know what they're going to do next, or I have an idea for you. And I love it when my students do that. Sometimes they will pitch me a story, I go, that writes itself. You don't have to pitch another word. Everyone in this room can see that movie in their brain. So I start with a concept, I expand it to a story, I then start to use the system of which 7 big beats do I know, or I think I probably know. By the way, nothing I ever write down when I do this Magnificent Seven is locked in. I tell my students this, I tell anyone who's doing this, it's a liquid document and it's going to change, especially when you start writing. That plot point's just not going to work. It's okay, we're going to change it. But I go from concept to story, from story to structure, and somewhere between concept and story, characters start to evolve. Who's going to be involved in this process? And that helps me, of course, as I expand outward.
Just to clarify, are you thinking up the beats first, or are you writing down the ideas as they come to you?
So I generally write down ideas as I get them, and it could be because I just heard something on the news, or I read a book, or I saw a story, or someone told me a story. So I write down crazy ideas, which sometimes I write them down, and I don't even remember why I wrote it down or what it means. So I go with idea, and then the beats, I do try to flesh out, are there enough beats here to make a story? Is there enough meat on this bone to actually make a full story? Or am I going to go down the road and find that there's just not enough here? I do like to take the idea and see if I can beat it out to just enough to get a story going.
And do you find that then when you're painting or sort of like writing yourself into a corner, is that where you go, you know what, I don't think I can go any further with this?
So on the writing process, I will tell you this, I don't start writing the actual screenplay, the dialogue, the action, all that fun stuff until I have spent a lot of time doing the outline, doing the 24 plot points. My 24 plot points aren't just 24 notes on a page. It's 24 plot points and then about a half a page of notes. Plot point, half a page of notes, another plot point. So it's a document-wise, it's 12, 15 pages long. And I always say to people, I don't care what you need to put in between those plot points. If he eats a ham sandwich, write it down. If you think he calls his mom, write it down. He might have nothing to do with the story. If it hits your brain, put it on paper. Writers have a bad habit of thinking up an idea and thinking we're going to remember it. And we don't do that. So I say put it into your plot points. But I don't get to the writing part until the outline is very well established. And then, before I go to the writing part, I actually do one other thing. I write it as a short story. So we go from idea to plot points, fully fleshed out, nice fat document. This thing is ready to be written as a screenplay. Well, it's also ready to be pitched. And if you're lucky enough to get in a room and pitch something in, they'll pay you to write it. It's a little better than a spec. Harder, but so I started writing my outlines, my 24 plot points, as a short story. 5 pages max, and I write it as a short story, like again, going back to those American short story format that you grew up in high school, quick rising action, twist and turn, and sometimes I write it, from the POV of the character, not how the screenplay is going to look, but I write it how I would pitch it to you. And in fact, when I go into a room to pitch something, I literally sit down and tell them a story. It's a story that I've written. I'm not reading it to them. I'm just going to tell them it like it's a campfire story. But I've written that story in detail. And honestly, and I did that because years and years ago, people said, oh, give us a treatment. And I hate treatments. They're dry, they're boring, they do a disservice to anyone's story. But if I write it as a story where the characters have, life and jump off the page, well, it's a page turner, it's 5 pages. But I don't even give them that, I pitch them that. Okay, so now I've written my 4 or 5 page short story. I like it. I'll share it with 1 or 2 people I trust. I'll show it to my wife, but she likes everything I write. So, and then I say, okay, I'm ready to write now. Now, I didn't do this with Track Down or the original ones, but it's something that I've evolved to do in terms of writing it as a short story. So, outline, 24 plot point outline, very detailed. Short story, 4 or 5 pages. Now I'm ready to write the screenplay. And I sit down, and that part, honestly, isn't difficult for me anymore.
Okay, so you're
Shortest part.
So you're not writing yourself into a corner because you've already mapped so much of it out.
If I'm going to be stuck in a corner, it's going to be in the plot pointing department. It's definitely going to be in the plot pointing department because there I'm like, how do I get out of this basement? How do I have him rescue the girl he's nowhere near? Or how do I, we all run into those how do I do this moments. And sometimes I put a little filler, like he just does it, and I'll worry about it when I get there. But I really don't like to leave a little filler scene in there because I know inevitably when I get to the screenwriting part, I'm going to have to fill that blank. So I like to solve my problems before I write the screenplay. Doesn't mean I always do.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.